Okay, thank you. Um, yes, last time we covered how to speak to your code, and I'll give a brief recap of what we covered last time. And this today we're going to talk about how web apps work, but just a brief overview of what we've done so far. We are working on building a quote generator application, which is a simple app that gives you a quote based on your mood right now. And in the first episode, we just understood how to use Cursor, how to use prompting techniques, and just build like a scaffolding UI with ShadCN components, which is like a basic template for our application. And today we're going to talk about how web apps work. And in the next few weeks, we're going to speak about how to use JavaScript to make your web apps interactive, how to use Git version control for collaboration and saving your code. And APIs in Supabase is mostly about how to connect your front end and back end code and saving things on the database, how to use APIs for your UI to connect efficiently with the backend database. And finally, in the last episode, we will deploy our whole application on Vercel, which is a platform that like allows you to deploy your applications with a single click. This is a screenshot of um, what we will be building, and a few insights from our first episode. I introduced Cursor to us, which is a coding editor, which is the most popular one right now. There are multiple coding editors out there, which have AI support like Windsurf and GitHub Copilot. And these are all great tools, but the thing is, the skills you learn in Cursor are also like transferable to every other code editor. And next, we'll recap on the effective prompting techniques we covered last time and the prompts we used to kick off Mood Quote. And so this was one of the most important slides of the previous episode, where we went over how to like have a mental model of how Cursor connects with uh, like three panels. And if you look, I have Cursor open right here. The left side is the file management. The center is the canvas, and the right side is where all the magic happens and where we write prompts and do um, like AI stuff. And if you look here, key things to notice about every panel is we have agent mode and ask mode. Agent mode is specifically for the coding agent to do tasks for you, basically write code. And ask mode is if you want to brainstorm with your code base and ask specific questions. And then the second one is for selecting the coding LLM model. If you have a strong preference for which one you like, you can select that. And if you think you do not have enough knowledge about what's best, I would suggest clicking auto for now and then moving forward. But if you have specific questions about like what's the best for a specific use case, feel free to reach out to me. And on the right side, if you look, um, you have something called as past chats, which is basically every time you use the chatbot, it keeps track of the things you spoke about. So if you look, I have spoken about troubleshooting one error and setting up our application. And one key thing to notice is if I go inside our first prompt, it has the history of everything I did from before. Like I can load older messages and go as far back as as I need to if I want to do something. So this was our first prompt that we wrote. And then one important thing is if you think you reached a good stopping point and you want to restore that checkpoint, you can click restore checkpoint. We're not going to do it right now, but this is a good way to roll back your application to a state that you liked, which you you thought was stable. But I would one way to do this is reach a good stopping point and then push your code to GitHub, which we will cover like in the next few episodes. But if you're working on a specific task and you're not happy with the changes that the coding agent made, then you should click on restore checkpoint and you'll go back to that state. One key thing I would recommend is every time you perform a new task in Cursor, make sure that you're not doing everything in the same context of the chat. Every time so today, if we're going to write a new feature, I would recommend opening a new chat and doing that. And if you're done with that feature and you work on a new feature, I would recommend hitting a new chat again. So this was the AI panel. This is where our code base will sit. And this is our terminal, which is sort of like the engine that drives our application. And this is also a toggle. So if you don't see it on your end, you just need to click the toggle panel right here. And this is where our code base will be. And this is the file management side of things just to access your files. And there's also a notepad, which is basically just to jot down your ideas as like which would not essentially be part of your code base, but if you just have thoughts or like just want to scribble some ideas, you can write them here, and then you can reference them in the chatbot. I'll show it to you later in our demo today. Let's go back to our slides and look at the next thing we covered last time. So we also covered what is a good prompt and a bad prompt. The difference between an unclear prompt and a clear prompt is that one is super vague and very compact, and one is very specific and it gives you just enough information to qualify as a seed prompt. So if you look at the seed prompt, the template is that build me something which has this tech stack and has these features or constraints. So an example of this would be in the next slide, which was we tried to build a seed prompt for mood quote, which is first we described what we are trying to build using Next.js, Tailwind CSS, and Shad CN UI. So these are all front-end technologies. Next.js is a modern WebJS JavaScript framework that like powers your application. Shad CN is for UI components that are pre-built that you just get out of the box and you don't have to um, like make them yourself. And Tailwind CSS is primarily used for animation. And then you give some information about your application and your features, and then a little bit of context about whether you want this application to be responsive or mobile first. And these were some of the UI prompts we made. We added a theme toggle, some mode suggestions, auto-populating the input field, and adding the click functionality to generate the code for us. So that was a brief recap. For today, our goal is to understand how the front end talks to the back end. What do the terms front end, back end, APIs really mean? What do these words mean? And trace like a complete journey from like the mode input to our final quote. What is the role of an API and why it is super important? And we'll build our first backend route to enhance our project. So this is to have a big picture mental model. If you look here, our mood quote app is on the left side. And just think of this as like a coffee shop. And this is just any generic modern web app. And your mood input is sort of like an order that you give when you go to a cafe. And the quote button that once you click on the quote button, that's like a cashier that takes your input. And the API route is like your barista who is actually responsible for the quote generation. And then there's the quotes database, which is like your ingredients shelf in the coffee shop and has history of all your orders. and the quote card output is like the beverage that you asked for in the first place. And this immediately translates to any modern web app. One different analogy as opposed to a coffee shop can also be in terms of like a restaurant, or um, you can think of it as a like when you hear the word wait API, think of it as a waiter at a restaurant who you can ask something specific for, and then they would bring it to you. Another way to look at it is also in the postal service, you have someone who delivers mail to you. So that person is like an interface between you and the mailing service. When you order from Amazon, when you receive the package, the person delivering you the package is that interface between you and those packages. So APIs are think of it as like a delivery handler for you who will bring your data from the database to the front end UI. And the terms front end and back end, what they necessarily mean is front end is anything you see on the web application, and back end is anything that is not visible to you but powers your application. So all UI tasks will be front end, and all back end things will be writing your APIs will be back end, configuring your database will be back end. So as a user of your application, you're never going to see an API route on the front end. You're never going to see what the database looks like on the front end. That's why the terms back and front. The front is facing the user, and the back is behind the scenes. And let's see how this analogy of coffee shop translates from coffee shop to our code base in Cursor. So if we look at our application, I'll show you one by one. So let's look at the coffee shop's floor plan sets up the vibe of the cafe, and it also in our code base, think of it as our file layout.tsx. So this file, if we look in our code base, it's under the source folder and then under application and the layout page. So if you look here, the main chunk of this code base is this HTML. So this is the structure of our application. And then if you look, there is a body. And then the next thing is the theme provider, the toggle icon that we spoke about earlier. So let me also pin up this application so we can see better. So the command to run your application is npm run dev. So if you do not know this command, you can just ask in the chat and tell the AI chatbot, tell me the command to run this application. And let's ask it in chat mode so it does not run it for us. So if I ask it in ask mode, it should tell us npm run dev. Oh, okay, let's try it again. Hopefully this should work here. Let's see if it opens up. Okay. Yep, so this is the theme provider, and then this is our application. It populates the input box. It gets the quote for us. And let me go back to Cursor and see what's happening. Okay, so it looks like it's running slower than usual, but yes, if you look here, it just gave us the commands to run, and then I used the same command, npm run dev. And if you look here in our code base, every time I ask it to get a quote for me, what changes in the terminal is this. So this is our API route. Get is the HTTP request, which we'll talk about later. This is our API route, and our URL for our API is API/quotes. And this question mark stands for query parameter, but which is basically a tag for all your quotes. So the tag for your quotes is mode, and then if you select a different mode, say com, and I say get quote, what we'll see here is that the tag has changed. So we have mode com. And the next important thing in Cursor is in terms of coffee shop, we have to prepare our coffee, we have different ingredients like milk, espresso, sugar. And in our code base, we have the components folder, which has all the UI we need. So we have different UI components like this button, this card, these little badges, this input box. So let me show you where this component folder sits in our code base. So let me zoom out a little bit. Let me close this file. Let me reduce this. Let me open a new chat. And if you look inside our app source folder, we have something called components. And then there is theme provider for our theme icon, the sun moon icon that we have up top right here. It's for that. And then inside the components folder, we have the badge. So this is for the mode badges. Then we have a button. So this is for the button that we click on, this get quote button. And then this is the card we have. And every card has a card header, a card title, a card description, a card action. So this was all generated by Cursor. And then we have the input folder. Then we also have a spinner. So if you'll notice here, if I click happy and I get quote, there's a spinner loading. And that spinner is also a component that was generated by Cursor. And I already showed you the API route in the code base, in the terminal. So this is our API route. But where exactly is this route coming from? So if you go under the app folder, there's an API folder that Cursor made for us. And inside the API folder, it has a route file. So if you look here, it has hard-coded all our quotes that belong. So happy has these three quotes, sad has these three quotes, energetic has these three quotes, and so on. And this is our API route. So if you look, it's a GET request, which I'll get into later. And then it is using the search parameter to extract from the mode. So if you look here, your mode matches the search parameter here, and it's checking what is the quote that it's matching to. And then it's matching quotes based on the mode selection. And then it's assigning the random quote from the mode that we use. So you don't have to deeply understand what this code base is doing, just on a high level, if you know that this is the route that gets us the quote that we need, I think that's enough. And if one best way to learn what each quote means, so I'm going to do this, add this to chat. So now it has tagged the route file and this code base, and I can ask, explain this code to me in simple terms. Yeah, Cursor is slower than usual today, but maybe it'll get back. 1 second. Yep. So It's telling us first in this file, there's a collection of quotes organized by different modes. So that is the case. And then it's telling there is a main function, get, that handles the request to get a quote. And then it's giving us an example. So like you can, like if this is still not simple enough, you can ask it to simplify further. But one way to learn what the code is doing is to just tag the code itself and ask it to explain it to you. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. And one key feature that we will build today is if we have a quote and say this is our quote, I want to be able to favorite my quote, like have a favorite quote, and potentially in the next few weeks be able to save this quote for me in a database. But the first step should be we need a button here, which will allow us to favorite this quote. So this is the prompt that I have. So update the quote card to include a favorite button. And then I specifically mentioned the Lucid React for our icon. You don't have to, but if you have a specific library or any icons that you like, you can mention it here so that it uses the same one as you like. When clicked, it should send a post request to a new API route with the current quote. So this is something very specific. I know it's engineering speak, but even if you don't mention this, it will do it for you because eventually we want this quote to be saved in a database and you will have to send a post request for it. I'll explain what a post request versus a get request means, but if you look here, all our requests so far were get requests. So let me first paste this prompt, and then I'll get to explain what get request versus post request means. So I'm going to paste this prompt in Cursor, and I'm going to open a new chat because this was primarily to understand the code base. And so now if you look, I have pasted this prompt, but one key thing to notice is because we know that we are adding a new feature, which means we are adding a new API route, and we know that API routes sit inside the API folder, and it will also be added to this route file. So let's tag the route file. And I'm going to select the agent and hit send. Wow, now it's suddenly faster than expected. Yes, all this code generation it would take me so long to write all this. But okay, let's go back to the code base and let's see what it has done. I think we need to hit accept and let's look at the code base. Let me see what's happened. I'll do code. And now we have a favorite icon right here. So you can just hit favorite and it says saved. And it goes back to its default state, but at least we have the button now. And then like once we have a database and it's saved, we can maintain the state of the quote. It will always say to saved. But for now, let's stick to this. Then once you do this, it will suggest you if you want to do something specific. So now let's look at how the code base has changed. So if you look here under API, it has created a new folder for our favorite quotes. So it's favorite, and then inside it has one more route. So for every route, it has created a new folder. So for quotes, we had one route, which is this. And then for favorite quote, we have another route. So if you look here, we are logging the code. So to log it in our terminal, you say console log, and then you select the favorite quote. And if you look here, the difference between the two files is one says get and one says post. And let me select a new one and show you the difference. So this we just hit now. If I click get quote, it is a get request. But if I favorite that quote, it sends a post request. So let me show you what the difference between the two is. So we'll cover APIs in our next sessions, but a brief overview is how APIs work is in terms of HTTP requests. The difference between GET and POST is that for GET, you are specifically retrieving something from the system. And for POST, you are updating the system to submit something. So in terms of, let's go back to the coffee shop example. So if you want to specify what you want, like I want this coffee, and you want to see like the menu items for the coffee, you will do it's like a get request. You just want to see what's available. But if you want your coffee shop to remember what your favorite coffee is, what do you order mostly, it's like a post request. So if you're pulling something from the system, it's a get request. But if you're updating the system for it to remember what needs to be done for future requests, it's a post request. So simply said, one is to retrieve data and one is to send data. So I think that was our favorite quote feature, but it's it's not fully complete because we have to connect it to the database, but it's a good start to be able to have like a favorite icon. So a few UI enhancements you can have is maybe don't have the word favorite, just have the heart icon. Maybe if you want it in the bottom right or bottom left, you can use specific like prompting language to say, move this favorite button to the bottom right of the the quote card and something like that. So I leave it up to you how you want to experiment, but for now, well, let's keep it here. And like a high level overview of our tech stack for this application is on the left, we have the front end and the back end. So what these words essentially mean is, like I said earlier, the front end is what the user sees, and back end is what the user does not see, as simply as possible. So what of the technologies we use for our front end is Next.js, which handles all the routing, ShadCN for our reusable components, and Tailwind CSS for some like built-in styling. What we'll add later in the next few weeks is Supabase to save our favorited quotes in a database. We'll use a quotable.io API to pull these quotes from an API source, and Vercel to deploy this with like a single click so that we can share our application and deploy it. We have a own domain name. And the key takeaways for this specific session is the front end is what the users see and the back end is what makes it work. Every feature in every app will have a simple flow of the user providing input, the backend API handling the logic, the business logic, and the output will be displayed to the user. APIs are the interface between the UI and the real data that sits in the database. Like asking the barista to make us coffee, like asking a waiter at a restaurant to bring us our food. Um, One key thing to know is that there is a lot of code in here. There's a lot of code in here that you don't necessarily need to know. You don't need to know what export async function really means. If you are curious, you can like paste it exactly in here and ask the agent how it works. But you just need to ask enough questions specific to your feature for the application to work smoothly. But if there is a specific uh, use case where you need to know, I will let you know, because later there will be a time where you will have environment variables or API keys, which are super important, and you should never leak that information. But for now, your code base is safe and you don't need to worry about quote unquote breaking the application. So feel free to like keep prompting or editing. For next week's episode, we have JavaScript and version control. So this will be super important. So right now you saw a lot of code that you're not sure what it really means, but that will be more clear in our JavaScript lecture. And we will cover variables, functions, and DOM interactions. These are just fancy words for simple things. Engineers like to sound smart, so they use these words, but it's really um, the hardest thing is in computer science is naming things because you want it to be simple, but then you cannot have too many simple things named the same way. So you have to be very specific with what each terms mean and also keep things generic. Um, we will make our UI interactive and just feel free to tag every part of the code that you do not understand to learn what that code is doing for you. Git will be a super important lecture because that will cover how to collaborate with other people, how to save your code in a GitHub repo. Git is super extensive, but the core Git commands are commit, push, pull, and branch, which will be explained very simply in our episode 4. And in fact, using GitHub will also help you with your design work or your writing work. And yep, I think that was it for today. And we are open for questions if anyone has any.